Hi, and welcome to Fall 2022. I'm so happy that you have decided to be a cooperating teacher for one of our lovely students from Texas A&M. I'm assigned a clinical teacher. Now what? It would be very helpful if you would get a space ready for them to put their stuff, just a small desk or even a tub or a corner. Make sure they have a chair and they know where they can put their belongings. Let your students know that there will be a guest teacher in your room. I like to call them guest teachers so that the kids immediately know that they're in charge. We're looking forward to creating the best Aggie teacher possible. I'd like to schedule a time with you to talk about your role, especially if you have not had a clinical teacher before. My phone number is listed on the screen, or you can certainly email me. In the first days, you want to make sure that you have a good routine for your teacher to follow. Make sure and introduce your clinical teacher to your team and your staff members. Your teacher will have to log 70 days per TEA. Those days can start with your teacher in service days. So if they're allowed to come to a training or a meeting, staff meeting, they are allowed to log those days as long as they sign in and sign out. The first few days are set up for observation purposes. Your clinical teacher should be taking notes and getting to understand and know the students and the schedule. They may ask a lot of questions, so set a time aside during lunch, planning, after or before school. Communication is essential. Your job is to demonstrate the teaching process. You want to demonstrate all the methods you use, the resources you have, how to take attendance, because when they have full responsibility, they'll have to know. Demonstrate lunch procedures. Make sure they're writing all of this information down so they don't forget. Show them how the kids are allowed to go to the restroom, how you do your planning, any kind of behavior management that you do for your class, especially if there's a special student with an IEP or a BIP. Help them learn your grading procedures. They can start off by grading papers for you as they're observing the class. Show them emergency procedures for sure. I've been in classrooms that have had fire drills or lockdowns, and the clinical teacher unfortunately did not know what to do. So make sure that you show her the chart or graph or whatever you have procedures for emergencies. Provide verbal feedback daily after their lessons or as you see them doing something great. We'll have a written feedback spot for you in their daily journal that will be online with a Google Doc, and I'll send you that link so that you can see what they're writing and provide feedback in that journal. At least once a week, meet formally to discuss the plans for the next week, decide what they're going to teach, decide what they're responsible for. Make sure you're leaving the clinical teacher alone in the classroom from time to time so she can have a feeling of independence. You'd be surprised how different they act when I go and observe and there's a sub in the room, or if the clinical teacher supervisor is in the room. Allow the clinical teacher to participate in parent conferences with parent permission, of course, campus meeting, and professional development. They're expected to be on campus or where you are for those professional development days and campus meetings. They will have a job fair sometime during the semester, so they will be absent on that day. Here's a breakdown of the responsibilities. You will get a copy of this. I'll email it to you, and it will also be located in that folder where their daily journal is so that you can have access to it. Like I said, it's in the handbook also. So here's some of the things that they will be responsible for. We start out very nicely with orientation. I talk to them, and they have a lot of forms they have to do. Then they'll observe and assist and team teach that first week. Some of them like to jump in and get going right away. They'll be taking notes though and making sure they understand the procedure for everything. Week 2, I like to have them co-plan, teach 1 or 2 classes or 1 or 2 subjects. Make sure you give them good feedback after they teach their lessons so that we can catch any mistakes and provide opportunities for growth early on. I'll have a seminar with them to talk to them about their lesson plans around this second week. Then in week 3, they'll independently plan and teach 2 to 3 classes or subjects, and I'll come in and watch them for their first formal observation. Now, these lesson plans are going to be, of course, what you and your team needs to be teaching, and they should be able to independently plan and add their own twist to it, unless you have rules and responsibilities that go along with the lesson plans, such as Lucy Calkins, where it's very structured. Then they will independently and teach 3 to 4 classes or subjects by week 4, and then hopefully jump into full responsibility for 10 consecutive days. Now, those 10 consecutive days can be broken up into 5 days, maybe a break, and then another 5 days, but I'll come in and do a formal observation during that full responsibility also. And then we'll set up a time for a midpoint conference during week 6 or 7. That will be a 3-way conference between me and you and the clinical teacher. It will probably be on Zoom, and we'll just chit chat about their lesson, their progress, if they have any questions, concerns, but I will need to speak with you privately before we kind of have that 3-way conference so that we can be on the same page. And then after their full responsibility, they'll just hit the ground running and kind of work back up, teaching 1 class, 2 class, observe you a little bit more, possibly go into another environment. They can do that up to 5 days, where they can go and observe other teachers, observe other grade levels, take notes and look and see what the other classrooms are like on your campus. And then we'll jump back into second full responsibility, 2 more observations, and then a final conference. That last week should be a transition week where the kids are getting back to having you completely in charge, and the clinical teacher is possibly making notes for their own use about what they need to remember from clinical teaching. So clinical teachers, this is very important, must have a teacher or a paid sub responsible for the classroom at all times. The clinical teacher is not allowed to be a substitute as per TEA rules. So make sure that they are not pulled to sub in another classroom. This is against TEA policy, and they will lose their day of credit. Lesson plans, what they're responsible, this is for me or for Texas A&M, they need to have long plans, and then they'll transition to short plans, which will be just exactly what you do on your campus for all of your plans. The long plans I'll get more into with them, because those are things that I look at, and I want to make sure that they have written out their lessons for their first 2 preparations, and at least a few subject areas before they transition to the short form. But you'll be expected to initial their long plans before they teach, so that you can go over what the responsibilities are for them for that particular lesson. This is an example of the long plan. I'll give you a copy in your shared folder, and also there's a copy of this in the handbook. It's meant for the teacher to work through possible questions, scenarios, materials, and application of learning. I know as experienced teachers, we kind of, are able to gather things, and we know where everything is in our classroom, but these long plans are really meant for them to make sure that they're prepared for their lesson that they're supposed to teach, and they're comfortable. Let's go over attendance. Absences have to be made up any part of a day up to a half a day. So if they leave early, they really need to make up a half a day to make up for that credit. So if it's an excused absence, if they're sick, if they're going to a job interview, they get 1 excused day for a job interview. then they have to make sure that they make up that day so that their total equals 70. Now, if it's unexcused, which means, they have a wedding or family event or something that can't be changed and they leave on a Friday as an unexcused absence, they do need to make up 2 days for that unexcused absence, which means if they only did it once, their total of TEA attendance would be 71 days. I can explain this a little clearer if we have that attendance sheet in front of us, but let me tell you, the clinical teachers will be counting those days and making sure that they get their required number of days. They are expected to contact you before they're absent if they're sick. If they need to leave for the dentist, they need to take a half a day. If they need to leave for any excused absence, they really need to take a half a day. We discourage them from leaving an hour early or 30 minutes early. We want to make sure they get that full experience for 70 days of credit. Again, thank you so much for being a supervisor for our Aggie clinical teachers. And I look forward to meeting you and learning about your kids and your classroom this semester.